It's time to take a new approach to finding true fulfillment in your career, health, and state of mind through insightful conversations with those who have found their professional and personal passions while achieving balance. Whether it's entrepreneurs, athletes, or healthcare professionals, we bring you real people, real growth right here on the Boost Podcast. Now, here's your host, Elena Lipson.
Hey Boost Squad, and welcome to episode 29. Elena Lipson here, and I am psyched to introduce today's featured guest, Michael Sacca. Michael, are you ready to join the Boost Squad?
I am.
So before we dive into today's episode, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Mosaic Growth Partners. Mosaic Growth Partners provides growth strategy consulting to entrepreneurs and organizations in the healthcare and older adult baby boomer market. They can help you bring a new product or service to market, identify and engage new customers and partners, or grow your market share. They also provide coaching and training. For more information, go to mosaicgrowth.com. That's mosaicgrowth.com. Now back to today's featured guest. So Michael was president of Crew, which has sourced freelancers for over $30 million in design and development projects. Crew was just acquired by Dribble, which is a community of creative designers who share small screenshots that show their work, process, and current projects. Michael led the negotiations for the acquisition of Crew and became the head of sales and marketing at Dribble. He's also the host of Rocketship.fm, a business podcast that's focused on inspiring entrepreneurs. Michael started his career by moving to LA and pursuing music. After 3 years of waiting tables and little success, he decided to teach himself to code. And he used his coding skills to launch Tiny Factory, which is a web development agency that won clients like GE and Kobe Bryant. And while running Tiny Factory, he started the Rocket Ship podcast and built many other apps and products, some of which have been acquired. So Michael, we have so much to get into with you today, and I know you've had several leadership roles and experience with scaling companies and even saving them from the brink of failure. So let's just dive right in and hear from you.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. So let's start with what are the 3 things we should know about the current market today for creative designers?
Yeah, so it's getting more competitive. More people are entering the workforce and choosing to contract, right? I think it's part of it is because of our economy. Part of it is simply it's people choosing the lifestyle that they want. And contracting is a great way for both people who want to be like serious contractors, they want to do it long term, and people that are in between. Maybe they want to start their own venture and they're contracting in order to pay the bills in the meantime. So we see a lot of people come in and out, and a lot of really talented people are choosing to contract rather than go and get the full-time position. So I think that's one of the biggest things to know. That also means that there's a lot of competition in the market. So we do see some normalization of the pricing. Right. And which is interesting to see in what used to be the Wild West 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. We do see rates kind of stabilizing. And so that's probably the second thing. And the third thing is that it's actually really hard to be a freelancer. And if you've never consulted or kind of worked contractually for many people at the same time, it is a challenge and a skill in and of itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And for my business, I don't have any design background, so I've had to outsource a lot of my design work. And one of the things I've noticed when I've looked into it, to your point, it is extremely competitive. So there's things like even in like Squarespace, you can create your own logo for free. You can go on Fiverr and have someone make you something for $5. And what do you see that doing to the industry and the market of designers, that have some really great skills, and the prices are getting brought down to near nothing? And that must be really tough for the designers that really command a higher price and deserve that higher price. So what are you seeing there?
So I think what it does is erode kind of the middle ground, right? It's like the eroding middle class in the economy. So you do have like these very cheap services, but the quality is also in line with the price, right? You get a $5 logo, you get a free logo from Squarespace. That's probably not going to embody what the Nike logo is, right? Or what the Adidas logo is. You're never going to get that. You are going to get a mark that you can use for your business, but is it really going to represent your business? And so what we see is people are still able to command a high value for these creative services, but the people that aren't quite as talented that maybe before could do a logo for $100. Now that $100 logo is $5, right?
Yep.
But at the high end where you're over $5,000 a logo, there's still a lot of demand because people always need creative talent. And there's really no way to streamline the creative process in a way that Fiverr could or that 99 Designs could.
Yep. You talked a little bit about how it's really hard to be a freelancer. So how does it work for freelancers who are part of Crew and now Dribble? What do you offer them that kind of alleviates some of the challenges of just being on their own?
Yeah, so I started off freelancing a while ago, but the hardest part is doing the work that you love. That's why you get into especially creative freelancing, right? You love development, you love design, and that's what you want to do all day. And that's why you start. And so, but when you start contracting, now you have to balance your pipeline. Like, do you have customers for the next couple months lined up? Have you done collections on the work that you've already done? Have you actually gotten paid? And that takes up so much of your time, just trying to do new client calls and make sure that you're signing on new clients. And then you have to do the work which you've lined up. And most people try to line up 40 hours a week of work, which is kind of the standard today. And so people still have that mindset that I got to do 40 hours of work, but then they realize that there's another 20 to 40 hours a week that they have to do just maintaining and running that business. And so what Crew does is try to resolve some of that. We try to bring you vetted projects, projects that already have a budget. So you can quickly see, is this a good fit for me? And we have an escrow service. So we take care of the collection, the checks in the mail. We take care of all of those issues for you so that you can spend 70 to 80% of your time actually doing the work that you love.
Great. And are there a lot of services like this in the design space, or are you one of the primary companies that are operating in this space?
Yeah, so we're one of the primary companies that are operating at the level of quality that we want to maintain. So you've got a lot of companies trying to eat the low end of the market. But again, that's not really good for anyone but the company, right? They're the only ones making money in that. The designers, the developers, even the clients are getting a subpar product, and the designers and developers literally aren't getting paid what they're worth. So we've really worked to maintain a high quality in the marketplace, which I think we're one of the few that have concentrated on quality over quantity and really like discount of work.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's a great model. And, it's obviously really great to have someone find leads for you and send business your way. But, one of the things I would find most valuable is having you guys play the role of debt collector. That's like one of my least favorite things to do with my business is hound people for money. And that alone would be like worth outsourcing for me. So I love that. So when you look at design now, like what do you see now and in the future?
In what way, right? Because there's web design trends, then we have product design trends. I mean, I would say that the value is going into product, right? I think web design is becoming increasingly kind of commoditized. And unless you're doing something really, really special, you're pretty much going to hit a ceiling in terms of the price that you can charge. But product design, UX, UI design, those are really where the market's moving today and where a lot of the talent and focus is. So if you're just getting started, that's really the most beneficial and in high demand skill right now that we're seeing.
Interesting. So I do a lot of work in the aging and the healthcare space where user design is so important and can really make or break a product. Are you seeing any industries that are hotter for this than others?
So actually, it's funny you mentioned healthcare. We contract with several larger healthcare companies to provide them with designed resources. And the reason is they're seeing that UX and UI design is a competitive advantage for them finally.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we know the healthcare space moves slow, but we are seeing companies like that who traditionally would more be focused on maybe just the data that they're providing, maybe just the client services, but now they're actually seeing that the design and the experience of their application is a competitive advantage. And when we see that in healthcare, that means we're seeing it across the board as they're one of the slowest industries to move.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So let's shift gears a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about your own career trajectory and your business. And I wanted you to give us 3 tactics for how you've grown your business.
Yeah, so we started out growing through content. We did a lot of content marketing, focusing on really attracting not just our customer, but maybe our customer's friend, right? So how can we get the conversation started about Crew? And could a friend's friend tell you about Crew? And so the content was really broad and overarching. And then we did tool marketing. So we built a bunch of services that helped to attract customers. And that was really great for SEO and getting our ranking up there. So when people search how much to make an app, we have a tool that helps you estimate that. And then now we're moving more into direct sales and SEO. And so I think, at each stage, you really have to figure out what works for you and what works for your business. And nothing that you do will ever be continual, right? There isn't just one thing that you can do forever. Every marketing channel that I've seen always has a plateau at some point when you have to put it on maintenance mode and find the next thing.
Yeah. So when you talk kind of about these 3 different tactics that you've used, like I'm curious as to like what the mix looks like now. Are you doing less content and tool marketing and more direct sales and SEO, or is it evenly divided? What does that look like?
Yeah. So, like our content, we used to do 3 posts a week. Now we do 1. We do 1, we focus on 1 quality article a week. And we see the same results as a year ago when we were doing 3. And so it's really about the quality of the content at this point, because we've built up a decent audience, but we didn't want to water it down, right? We wanted 1 good article a week. So, and then the tool marketing, we're kind of on maintenance mode for that too. We've built some really great properties, we maintain them, and we're really focused on kind of outbound and SEO marketing right now, which is probably 70% of our efforts.
Great. And going back to the content marketing, I know a lot of early stage firms, start with that. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how long it took till you got to a point where you felt like you really generated good awareness and built a good size audience.
Yeah, it took about a year, I would say. The times were a little bit different too. I would note Medium was just starting and we really rode that Medium wave, which gave an extra push, especially in the beginning when Medium was so young. It's a little bit harder now. And I don't know if content's always the right way to go for every business, because if you're not doing it really, really well, it's really hard to get exposure and to kind of cut through the noise, since every company does as a content marketing strategy now.
Yeah.
So you really got to find your niche, find your angle, find the way that you can draw attention, because just having a blog and putting out content probably isn't enough these days. And even some of the platforms that we used in the beginning, Medium, Hacker News, the different listicles, they're saturated now too. And it's harder and harder to get distribution. And so I think companies really do need to think of new ways to get exposure and not always rely on what was done, what worked for a company 5 years ago.
Yeah. And what's the role that your podcasts play in growing your business, or are they really kind of separate?
So they play a really nice role in that it gives people an intimate experience with us. So like I've done podcasts for the last 3 years. I'm a huge fan of podcasts. And I find that, even if we have less listeners on the podcast than we would on, say, a Medium post, right? A Medium post might go out, we might hit 100,000 people. And on a podcast, we might hit 10,000. But those 10,000 have now, they've sat with us for 20, 30 minutes in an intimate manner and really listened to us. And I think there's a different level of connection that you have when you're sitting with headphones listening to someone speak than maybe reading their writing and kind of skimming through an article online.
Yeah, well, being a podcast host, I fully agree with you, but I might be biased. So tell me a little bit about how you stay productive and focused when you're working on, some podcasts. You've taken on this role with Dribble. I know you've had some side projects in the past too. So how do you kind of stay productive? What are the tactics that you use?
Yeah, so I try not to get too rigid with myself. I really try to focus on what I'm motivated to do that day. I mean, generally, I can prioritize what absolutely needs to be done to keep the business moving forward. But then I try to leave room and enough time to do some of the creative activities, some of the unknowns, right? So in every business, you always need to be doing a bit of R&D. You always need to keep that experimentation alive, or else you just become a slave to your email. So I don't use a task list. I really try to keep it a little bit looser in my day so that I'm able to carve out a couple hours sometimes when I can to do a creative work, which also energizes me and it keeps everything fresh. So I don't have any specific, I guess, specifics that I follow, any kind of methodology, but I would encourage people to listen to their body, listen to kind of what they're excited to do and to get into, because sometimes if you're really excited to do something, so there's usually a reason. And that's usually when your best work comes out, and it kills me to squash those opportunities where I will do some of my best work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like you're really in tune with kind of what you need, and you sound pretty disciplined. Even though you don't keep lists and stuff, you don't need to, because you're disciplined and focused, and you can kind of do that on your own without having to follow a to-do list. So that's great. In spite of all this productivity, I'm sure there are some times where you may have stagnated or stopped making progress in your career. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe give us an example?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's been more than a couple times. I mean, I built an agency, Tiny Factory, out of San Diego, and it got to a point where I didn't want to do it anymore. Like, I just didn't want to walk into the office, and it took me about a year to eventually walk away from the business. But I just knew, I knew when I drove in the morning, I just didn't want to be there. And even though it was the company that I started, that I built, it had just become something that I wasn't excited about anymore. And so that was, I stagnated for about a year. We didn't really grow. The company didn't grow. We maintained ourselves, but there was just something that told me there was something else that I needed to be doing. And so when I finally stepped away is when, about 6 months later, I ended up joining Crew. And so that was a great transition, but it took me in the end about a year and a half till I really got my footing again. And that was kind of a frustrating time, knowing that you're a little bit stuck, that you built your own kind of fortress, and that you needed to walk away from the company that you built. So that was one time. And then, at Crew, we go through our peaks and valleys too. We do plateau our revenue. And so there have been 6 months at a time where we just haven't been able to grow. And we've had to do a lot of experimentation to kind of get the gears going again. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you were describing with Tiny Factory, I know I can relate to that. Sometimes, at least for me, I get really excited about starting something new, and I love all of the strategy and work that goes into building something. And then sometimes once it's off and running, I'm sort of bored by it, or I'm no longer excited by it. And it can be really hard to not feel bad and not feel like you need to stay in it because you built it and you worked so hard to get it to where it's at. But sometimes that happens, and sometimes certain people are just meant more to be like starters and then hand the reins over to somebody else to continue with operations. I don't know if that's something you felt at Tiny Factory, but when you were describing that, that's what it kind of reminded me of. And I've been in those situations.
Yeah, no, it was that, getting started is the exciting part. I think when you have something that you like doing, there is growth, right? And I think some of that boredom may come from a lack of growth. And like I mentioned, you always have to be doing R&D. And I think sometimes when we have a business that makes money, we stop doing that R&D. We stop trying to progress the business because we know at that moment what we have to do to continue making money. And I think that's what happened with the agency was we stagnated. We were doing the same type of projects over and over again. We were constantly chasing new clients, and there wasn't any element of a fresh challenge. And sometimes we need that.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% feel that way a lot of the time. So I get that. I know you guys have also had in the past some other side projects that you did. Can you talk a little bit about the role of those side projects and sort of your view on having them?
Yeah, so the first side project we ever did was Unsplash, which is now its own company. We broke it off from Crew, and Michael, the founding CEO of Crew, is now running Unsplash full time. And so that was a huge success, and it really did save Crew at the time. It it brought over enough leads so that Crew could continue to make money. And Unsplash is now one of the largest photo sites in the world. But that was also kind of an anomaly, right? And so we did that once, and then we built a couple side projects that were very focused around Crew, like how much to make an app, how much to make a website, which were estimators, and they did really well. And then we built Mood Board, which did pretty well. So we had a really good streak. And then as we grew, we became about 30 people, and we tried about 5 or 6 different side projects. We even had a dedicated side project team, and they either never made it out to market or they just kind of flopped. And what we ultimately decided was it was costing us too much money to continue to develop those new side projects. So we ended up shutting down kind of our whole side project initiative now, because it was too expensive, and we just weren't hitting the home runs that we had at the very beginning. So I do think that it can be really productive, but you really have to think about why you're doing it, right? Like a side project shouldn't be a side project. It should really be a focused effort around something that will affect the bottom line of your business. So the ones that worked really well for us were the ones that were directly related to Crew. The ones that didn't were a bit more ambitious and a bit more passion projects rather than side projects or tools that were directly related to our business.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. I mean, one of the things that I've noticed, and I think you talked about this, so Unsplash was one of the first ones you did. It was really successful. So then you started thinking, why don't we just do more? And some of those didn't work out as much. I've had that happen in my own business, not necessarily with side projects, but just with new things I've done. I had a great track record, and then I just figured any new thing I did, would just turn to gold. And that's not really,
Right.
that's not really what happened. And I know for me, like, my confidence and kind of like my psyche took a blow, and you have to kind of work your way back from it. So how do you deal with that sort of psychologically when you're doing these other things and they're not working, when you're used to having all this success? How do you kind of get in that mindset to just like move past it, get back to the task at hand, and let that roll off your shoulders and move forward?
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna do side projects, right, you have to look at them like that first business idea, which means it has to hit, or you got to let it go. And I think where we get stuck is when we have an idea and we really, really want that idea to work, but it just doesn't. And sometimes it just doesn't for a reason. And there's a really destructive myth out there about giving up, right? Especially in the entrepreneurial world, where it's the 90th door that you knock on is the one that opens and creates this huge thing. But when we're doing like a side project, we don't really have 90 doors to knock on. And so it's really about kind of releasing your ego from the idea, throwing the idea out there. If it hits, that's great. If it doesn't, you got to move on, and you got to move on quickly, because this stuff is very costly. So that's kind of how we started to look at the side projects, which is why we ultimately shut them down, because it was basically us admitting that this wasn't a productive avenue right now for where our business was.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about how you kind of take care of yourself in the midst of all these different things that you're involved with. Your podcast, you have another one coming up that you're getting ready to launch as well, and your business. So how do you take time for yourself amongst all that?
Yeah, so I have 2 kids, which really helps, right? So that they kind of give me some of the fencing that I need. So I do try to leave the office, quote unquote, at a reasonable hour. I do most of my side work late at night. So I make sure that I have dinner with the family. I make sure I have breakfast with the family. But I have a set window at night when I can do some of the side work. And you start to focus yourself. So I know that I need to go to the gym. I know that I need to eat healthy, or else I'm going to feel like crap, and which means I won't be as productive. And then it's also about kind of being disciplined with the time that you have. So if you have a 2-hour block to get something done on a passion project that you want to do, you really only have those 2 hours, right? It can't be 8 hours of browsing on the web and 30 minutes of writing code. You have to just get into it and write for those 2 hours. And you give up some of those, I guess, time wasters that we often do online, where we think we're productive, but we're actually not.
Yeah, no, that's a good thing to get to that point.
Yeah.
So you've given us a ton of great tips, but let's go ahead and close out with a parting piece of guidance for us.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, one of the things that it took me a really long time to learn was to get over the fear of doing something unknown. And, even starting out, it was very cautious. It took a long time to kind of get to a point where I was willing to take a risk. But when I did actually take those risks, things worked out, never in the way that I had planned. But when you start taking that first step, really things happen. And I really had to release myself from like having to plan and know every move that I wanted to make in order to execute, and really just start moving in a direction and letting things happen and reacting more to what was happening and what opportunities I had, rather than trying to plan every opportunity before getting started.
Yeah, I love that. So take a risk and make things happen. I hope today's episode inspires you to think more about how you can find your passion and live your best life. For more information, including links to resources that Michael and I chatted about today and how best to get in touch with him, head on over to our website, theboostpodcast.com, and check out our show notes from this episode and catch the Boost bonus. Michael, I want to thank you for sharing your journey with us today. And remember, anything is possible for you.
Now that you've completed this episode, the next step is to join the Boost Squad for strategic insights, tips, and tricks, as well as exclusive resources designed specifically to accelerate your personal and professional growth. All this and more is waiting for you at theboostpodcast.com.